A gute Woche, and a guten Chodesh, and a guten Yontes for Chodesh Kislev. Today's Farbrengen, in general, was very much in the spirit of the Kenes HaShluchim. In fact, the Rebbe right away began the first Sicha. Rebbe began that we know the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that everything that happens to a Yid is Hashgacha Protis. Therefore, regarding now that this Shabbos, we're in the Shabbos of the Kenes HaShluchim, the convention of all the Shluchim from all over the world, so we must say that we can find an indication for this in this week's Sedra, in this week's Parsha. Rabbi right away explained that in previous generations, these searches and these findings to find sources for Inyanim and Torah, it was left up to people on their own, and people on their own were capable to go ahead and search and find a source in Torah for whatever is taking place. However, now that the generations are getting weaker and smaller, as Rabbi used an expression in Gemara, Achsher Dore, is then this generation worthy? Is then this generation in the proper level? In other words, it's an expression with a question. However, this shows that now we are in further generations and lower generations. So Memela, now the Rebbe is making it easier for us, so that we shouldn't have to search and work hard and put in effort, Yigiyah, go through an inyan of Yagaita Mitzvah, but it's being made much easier for us, and it's put on the table that we can find a very open shayches between this week's Sedra and the inyan of Shlichus. To find the remez, or more than a remez, how it's spelled out openly in this week's Sedra, the inyan of Shlichus, it's how when Yitzchak sent Yaakov, he should leave him, and he sent him to Lava. And actually, this is the first time we find an inyan of Shlichus in the Torah. The expression of Vayishlach, that he sent him, and this sending is the inyan of Shlichus. The first time in the Torah we find it is today in Parshas Torah. Though we find by Noach that Noach sent Vayishlach es hayoina, that Noach sent the bird to find out if the Mabel has already stopped, but there we cannot say that it has a halachic concept of Shlichus. Shlichus has to be a bardas, a person who has common sense, and therefore one person can appoint another person as a shaliach. However, when a person sends a bird or an animal or anything like it, then it definitely, he can send it, but the concept of shlichus does not apply here. We have, which we read about in last week's Sedra, how when Avram sent Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak, so Rebbe explains that is also not an inyan of shlichus. Why? And here the Rebbe brings out that there's an inyan of shliach and there's an inyan of an eved. Eliezer was an eved of Avram. He was a servant of Avram. However, he was not in the capacity of a shliach. An eved, as explained in Chassidus and Svarim, is not a metzias for himself. In other words, an eved is not a being for himself. The entire existence of the eved is kol ma shekona eved kona rabbi. Everything which is owned to the slave, there's no ownership concept by a slave, because his master owns him and owns whatever the slave owns. So when Eliezer went as he was sent by Avram, so it was Avram's eved who went to take care of something. But it did not have a category, we cannot put that into the category of shliach. What is the inyan of a shliach? A shliach is the person himself, the shliach, is a person in his own right. What do we say is the inyan of shlichus? That whatever the shliach does is considered exactly as if the Mishaleach would do it. As if the one who sent him would do it. The Rebbe went into more deeper explanation explaining the difference between an Eved and a Shliach. However, all the pluses and all the advantages which apply by a Shliach, this does not apply by an Eved. This does not exist by an Eved where one servant takes care of something for his master. Because the servant we consider him non-existent. It's just that he's doing service to his master. The Shliach, on the contrary, the Shliach is a person in his own right. And the Shliach was chosen by the Mishaleach to do things for the Mishaleach. And not only that, but the Shliach can add on from his own as well. And the Shliach can add on from his own. The only thing, the Shliach has to be well aware that it is not koichi v'oitzem yodi, it's not his strength and his power what's giving him the success. That chas v'shalom he shouldn't think. But on the other hand, the Shliach is permitted to add on from his own. And here the Rebbe went into another inyan. One may say, how can I be given a shlichus? And we say a shlichus should reach out to where? Even to Choron, just like we find in the Sedrus that what is the inyan of Choron? So Chassidus explains that Choron wasn't just geographically a place. Choron in Lashon HaKodesh means anger. Charoin af shel olam. What does that mean? And again, the pshat here, it means that the people that lived in Choron did not act properly, so therefore they angered the Eibishter. What does it mean spiritually? Spiritually it means that we have to reach out in shlichus even to a spot like Choron, even to a spot which is considered a spot that angers the Eibishter. In other words, people that are on a level of Choron, meaning their actions are not satisfactory to the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So shlichus has to reach out to those people and bring them close to the Eibishter. And who is the Mishaleach who sends? Who is the one that sends? So just like we find in this week's Sedre, Yaakov was sent by whom? By Yitzchak. The Rebbe ties in this inyan of Yitzchak to the name of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And also the other name which the Frierdiker Rebbe had, Yosef. What is the inyan of Yosef? So when Yosef was born, his mother Rachel expressed herself, Yosef Hashem li bein acher. The Rebishter added to me another child. So there's a famous interpretation from the Samach Tzaddik that what is the inyan of Yosef? Yosef's inyan is to add on. Whom does he add on? He reaches out to the one who is classified as a ben acher, the other son, meaning an outside son. And the whole idea of a Yosef is to reach out to this ben acher and make him for a ben to be suitable to be considered a ben to the Rebishter. Yosef Hashem li bein acher, to be added to the bein of Hashem, to be considered a son of Hashem. Who should be considered a son of Hashem? The one who until now was in the level of acher, was in the madrega of a ben acher. And as we find, just like we find by Rachel, Rachel expressed herself, Yosef Hashem li bein acher. That's the Rebishter she was thankful for the birth of Yosef, but she asked for another child. This is the Pashat Pshat, what it means. And the Rebishter Taki gave her another child. He gave her Binyamin, who was born after Yosef. What does this show us? That this avodah of Yosef, this is the avodah of Yosef. That's the whole inyan of the Frierdiker Rebbe, as the Rebbe teaches it. And Memela, what does the Frierdiker Rebbe demand from us? What's the whole inyan of shlichus? To reach out to Choron, to Charoin af shel olam, to reach out to those who are in the meantime considered a bein acher. And what is our responsibility? To see to it that the bein acher becomes a bein Hashem. He's added on to the list of sons of Hashem. But said, after all this, one may ask, we know kshoit atzmacha v'achar kach kshoit acher. First you beautify yourself, then you go ahead and beautify others. So there are those that may say, I am not yet in a madrege to be able to accomplish such type of a task, to reach out to an acher or to people that are on a level of chon, to reach out to them and bring them close to Yiddishkeit and bring them close to Chassidus. So they answered. There's an expression from the Rebbe Rashab, Friedrich Rebbe's father, based on expression in Gemara. He explains that in normal circumstances we could have such type of luxuries and sit back and say that we are not ready to do anything yet until we beautify ourselves. However, when it's a time where every second counts and we are getting ready for the coming of Mashiach and we have to be mevarer, we have to purify the entire world, so use the expressions of Lashon HaGemara, chatoif va'achoil, chatoif ve'ishti. Grab the food and grab the drink. In other words, it's not a time to sit down and wait for ceremonies and wait for preparations and plan things and program things. And once I will be ready and I will be in the proper madrege, then I will go out and bring other people to a higher madrege. Now is a time when we cannot allow ourselves this type of an attitude. This type of an attitude nowadays is considered a luxury. Now we have to act in a way of chatoif va'achoil and chatoif ve'ishti, to grab. In other words, eating and drinking, we're not talking about gashmistic eating and drinking. We're talking eating. What's the meaning of eating and drinking? Eating and drinking, as explained in Chassidus, when a Yid eats or when a Yid drinks, he's mevarer birurim. He brings out all the sparks of kedusha that are in the food or in the drink which he's eating. The same when we are talking now, it is our obligation to reach out to every Yid and bring out the lighten and kindle the sparks of the kedusha that are within each and every Yid, and regardless of whatever level a Yid is, a Yid who can be considered identified as a Chon resident. In other words, Charoinaf Shalayla, or a Yid who is in a level of Bein Acher, an outsider, another son. And what are we doing? We are changing him from being a Bein Acher to be considered a son to the Rebishter. Yosef Hashem li Bein, be considered a Bein to Hashem. Then the Rebbe continued, we know that the Seder in Torah is also Torah. In other words, this schedule, the sequence in which Inyanim are related in Torah, this in itself is also part of Torah. So we find that before Yaakov left on the shlichus from Yitzchak, what did he get before that? He gave him the brachas. V'yitel l'cho Elokim mitala shamayim u'mishmanei ha'oretz. This was given to him before he left. What is v'yitel l'cho? Actually, the pasuk should have used the expression yitel l'cho. The Rebishter should give you. What is v'yitel l'cho? So there are other mefoshim and chumash that learn that the vav comes as it's a vav ha'hemshech, meaning it's a vav that comes in a continuation to what was discussed before. In other words, after what was discussed before in Chumash, so v'yitem l'chalakim, this led to the brachas which Yitzchak gave to Yaakov. However, Rashi learns different. What does Rashi say? Yitem v'yachser v'yitem. Gave him the brachas of v'yitem l'chalakim that the Rebishter should bless you. And he immediately, the first word of expression of bracha, which Yitzchak is expressing to Yaakov, even before he has a chance to say the word, which the first word is Yitain. Before he has an opportunity to say Yitain, he's right away saying Veyitain. What is the vav? That there will be a repeat on the brachas. The brachas will be given and repeated again and again. This is what Rashi teaches. Veyitain. Yitain, once given. V'yachzor v'yitna will be given again. So this is what a Yid has to know, that the Rebishter gives brachas, the Rebishter gives bench Yid and blesses each and every Yid, And right away we are notified that in what type of way does the Rebbe to give the brachas, we should know right away that these brachas will be given again. This is spelled out even before the bracha. Before we reach to the first contents, to the first word of the bracha, we are right away stressing, Ve'yiten lecha. You should know it will be repeated again. Now this is, what is this concept? This is the concept of L'katchila Riba. L'katchila Riba is the same idea. Not that we are going in an orderly fashion right away. Before we are above and beyond, before we get into bracha, we are right away told that this bracha will be repeated and given again and again. And Mela the Rebbe says, now that we're talking about shluchim, so there's the bracha which is given to shluchim, that they should have all their needs. Simply begashmi. That all the needs which shluchim need for their parnasa need, and as far as boneh, chayim, zoyne, children, health, and parnasa, all of this should be provided to them, that they should be able to have it in a way without any worries. The Rebbe mentioned that we saw the attitude of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov, even before he became the Baal Shem Tov, and even later, before he was Nisgala, he revealed himself as a Rebbe. And even later, after he acted as a Baal Shem Tov as well, we find in the writings of the Frierdiker Rebbe how the Baal Shem Tov was concerned with the Gashmius of Yidden. When his prime concern was simply to worry and make sure that Yidden have whatever they need. And that is why the Rebbe says, when Shluchim are sent out, those that left years ago and many years ago, and those that went on Shlichus yet, when the Frierdiker Rebbe sent them on Shlichus, so there was always a strict policy to make sure to it that the Shluchim have whatever they need in terms of simply being able to make a living and provide the needs for themselves and for their children. Here, talking about this inyan, about the Gashmiyas of Shluchim, and about the Gashmiyas of a Yid in general, Rebbe got into speaking about other people, not only Shluchim. The Rebbe was talking about people who are in business. There are those people who are in business, and they get into Moresh Chayra, get into moods of sadness, and they complain, and they are not happy, and they look at their own business and immediately start looking at the business of their friends. And the Rebbe used the expression kinas soifrim. There's an expression in Gemara, kinas soifrim tar bechochma. The Chazal tell us that when there was envy from people who are learning from one to the other, this will lead to an increase in knowledge. Why? Because one who envies the other, what will be the outcome? The outcome will be he will try and lift himself up to the same level as the person whom he's envying. However, here the Rebbe is lending that expression, but he's using it kinas soichrim. The kinna, the jealousy, which is going on amongst merchants. In other words, when somebody sees that somebody else is doing better than him, he lets it out in a jealousy. And naturally, this is not the proper attitude. And when people get carried away into such type of things, then they have to come at night and sit down and learn. So we can imagine what type of a kfiyah sitim b'Torah comes as an outcome of such person, after such a day, what kind of a kfiyah sitim b'Torah he could have. So the person's probably going to tell us that when he sits down to learn, and he learns Chumash, so we know that the halacha tells us that the Torah shebiksav, in the written Torah, even if we learn and we don't understand, we are also fulfilling the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So fine, he'll grant you he learns Torah at night and he doesn't understand what he's learning, and not understanding, he still fulfills the mitzvah of learning. But there's another question behind all this. The famous expression which the Rebbe quoted many times. This is regarding his learning Torah. However, the question is, was hat Torah dir gelernt? What did Torah teach you? You claim that this is the way you are learning Torah. Okay, let's accept that. But the question arises, what did Torah teach you? In other words, what type of an effect did Torah have on this person when a person could act in such a way? And then the Rebbe, leading subject into subject, led into also that when people have what they need, however, they start looking around and they claim that there's certain luxuries which they can't afford. And this is beginning to bother them. The Rebbe says, so think back for a moment. Did your parents have these luxuries? Did your grandparents have these luxuries? They didn't have it and they were satisfied. So why are you complaining? Furthermore, so the Rambam writes that Inyan of Tefillah, the mitzvah of Tefillah, when we are mispal to the Rebishter, when we ask the Rebishter for something, it's based that when we are missing something and we are shouldn't say complaining, and we are asking, we want that what we are missing should be fulfilled, then we daven to the Rebishter, and not to anyone else. The Rebbe says these people as well, they want to fulfill what the Rambam writes. So they have what they need. However, they are missing luxuries, and missing things which are not needed, so they are applying the rule of the Rambam. That the Rambam says that when you're missing things, you should daven to the Eibishter. So, Bone Chayim Mezoine, Parnasa, good health, and children, Baruch Hashem, they are blessed with. And then when they are searching for things, for what to ask the Eibishter for, Memela, they are going around and they are complaining. And they are putting themselves into a position of a Mara Shchoira, of creating sadness within themselves. It says obviously referred here to somebody who has written to him about a Gzeira, about a decree which the person was complaining about. The Rebbe says, I answered him. And the Rebbe says, he writes me back the next day, again, the same thing about that there's a Gzeira, that there's something undesirable, which he's complaining about. And the Rebbe says he kept on getting the same letter again and again, day after day. There is no gzeira, there is nothing undesirable. Person is just putting themselves into a mara shchoira, into a sad mood, and therefore he's kind of like picking on things and looking for things and searching for things and creating things to complain about. And here talking on all these subjects, Rebbe also came into another subject. The Rebbe says there are those individuals who are chosen to be as mashpiyim, or those who were chosen to chazach or say shiurim minigle. So what happens? What are they doing? Month after month that they were chosen and given this responsibility. So they go ahead and lock themselves into a room and lay themselves down and go to sleep, and they are waiting that somebody should come knocking on the door and rip the door down, and then they will respond and go ahead and give from their goodness to give a shiur and learning, to give a shiur and chassidus, and to be mashpia and so forth. And naturally, this is not what they were appointed for. If they were appointed that they should go out and voluntarily share their knowledge and share their wisdom and share it with others, are they complaining? What do they get for this? He says, what kind of a complaint is that? He says, so many mamorim and chassidus, so much new chassidus is being printed, so much chassidus is being poured, and why isn't all this appreciated? Rebbe says, just this Friday, a new mamorim from the Rebbe Rashab came out of print, and chassidus is constantly being poured, and we just have to respond to it. We have to respond, and those who are given their tasks should do their tasks, as well as mashpiyim and chazing chassidus and saying shiurim for people. All of them should do it, and do it with simcha, and do it with happiness, and know what they were chosen for, and to do it with the simcha v'tuv lavav, and not to complain, and again not to go around and be marash chayra and create sadnesses and bad moods and all of that. All of this is not wanted and not desirable. Everybody should know to fulfill their task, and everyone should be involved in what they have to be involved in. Then the Rebbe continued, and he says that it's brought in Sifrei Musa, that when something is discussed, and you want that this something should really be brought down into reality, and something just shouldn't remain in the air. And here we are talking about the Gashmiyas of the Shluchim, how they have to have the Birchas Hashem of the Yiten L'cha, and Yitein, the Yachzer V'Yitein. However, the Rebbe says he's going to come out with something practical as well. In other words, to bring it down into mindset. He said he's talking to all those who have Botei Chabad, who have Chabad houses, and throughout the course of years they have accumulated debt, that their expense throughout the years reached to a point where their expense is more than their income. The Hoitzah is more than the Hachnosa. To alleviate this on them, every one of the Shluchim that is in such a position, the Rebbe says, should submit after Shabbos a statement, financial statement. There should be a statement by an accountant, where the accountant will show his deficit, and at the same time also show what the money which he spent went for, that it went for the causes of the upkeep of the Beis Chabad. Then the Rebbe says 10% of his chayvus, the Rebbe says, with the thanks of Yidden Nedidim, Yidden that have contributed, the Rebbe says it has been made possible to contribute to every shliach 10% of his deficit, 10% of his chayvus, and after that, when he is left with 90% of his chayvus, 50% of that, half of the chayvus of all the shluchim, the Rebbe says he will give a loan to every shliach on half of their chayvus to be paid back within a period of 4 to 5 years. The Rebbe says that their financial statements should be submitted to the committee who is in charge of the Kenes HaShluchim, of the Shluchim Convention, and when it will be submitted to them, and also together those that are in need of the loan, in other words, those who are also will be getting the loan, should also submit their dated checks in the same envelope. And then the Rebbe says they will be getting 10% as a donation, 10% of their chayvus, of their debt, and 50%, and after that, the 50% of after that will be given to them as a loan payable within 4 to 5 years. But also mentioned that tomorrow after Mincha he will give each and every shliach, and it's only for shluchim, the Rebbe stressed, he will give every shliach a maimah. Also the Rebbe said, being that the Frierdiker Rebbe introduced the Indian of spreading Chassidus not only through men but through women as well, all those shluchos that are here will also receive a maimah tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow after Mincha. Now let us go to the latter part of the Farbrengen. In today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe explained 3 Rashis in this week's Tedra, 3 Inyanim in this week's Parsha. First, he explained that question is raised how Yitzchak and Rivka were mispalel, prayed to the Rebishter to be blessed with a child. Vayeta Yitzchak Lashem, Yitzchak prayed to the Rebishter l'neichach ishtoi, opposite his wife, ki akorahi, because he considered Rivka as an akara that she wouldn't be able to have any children. So the question arises, how did he know to put the blame on Rivka and not on himself. What? Maybe he was an Akka equally as Rivka was an Akka. How did he know to be mispalel on Rivka? Because Rivka was an Akka. So the answer that could be given is that, being that the Rebbe told Avram, Ki bi Yitzchak yikara Chazarah, that Yitzchak will be his continuity for children, so he knew that it cannot be because of him. Therefore he was mispalel to the Rebbe that the Rebbe should help Rivka, who was an Akar, and the Rebbe should bless them with children. On this explanation, however, the Rebbe says, the question arises, we find by Yaakov, later in Chumash, that Yaakov was promised various things by the Rebbe, and nonetheless, he didn't take it for granted. He was mispalel to the Rebbe, he prayed to Hashem. So it's brought in Sfarim, why did he pray at the time he was already pledged by the Rebbe that he will get everything? Yaakov was afraid, Shema yigrei machet. Maybe he sinned in between, and his sinning in between led to it that the pledge of the Rebbe is no longer there. So Memela, Yitzchak over here, why wasn't he afraid of the same? The Rebbe promised Avram Avinu ki bi Yitzchak yikara Chazarah. However, who knows what happened in between? And Memela, could be he is also at fault to the fact that they're not having any children. The Rebbe explained, Yitzchak knew that he was an oila tmima. He was treated by the Rebbe in a very special way. To the extent that we read in Chumash that Yitzchak wanted to leave from Eretz Yisrael and go to Chutz La'aretz, the Rebbe didn't let him. What does it mean the Rebbe didn't let him? Because he said he's an oila tmima, and an oila tmima should not leave Eretz Yisrael. He's like a whole and complete oila that is being brought in the Beis Hamikdash as a koh. Memele Yitzchak knew that he's being guided, he's being watched. So that's why the Rebbe is learning he wasn't afraid of the fact that Shema Gora Machet, perhaps an Aveira was goyim, to the fact that the Rebbe will no longer fulfill Ki bi Yitzchak yikara Chazarah, because he knew and he realized how throughout his entire life the Rebbe watched him constantly. Even when it came to give the brachas, and Yitzchak wanted to give brachas to Esav, how can we say that he was watched at the time that he wanted to give brachas to Esav and he didn't plan to give him to Yitzchak? So the Rebbe is learning Yitzchak's calculation on that was, we learn weiter in Chumash Devarim we have that a Torah tells us that a B'choyer gets double in inheritance as opposed to all other children. We read about that in Pashas Kiseitzi. So the Torah tells us Lo yuchal odam levaker es pnei ben hasnua tachas ben say Torah Kiseitzi in Chumash Kiseitzi. Example, if he had his oldest child was from the woman whom he does not like, and his second child is from a woman whom he does like, so he cannot go ahead and change the status of B'choira and give it to the child who is from the mother whom the father likes. The B'choira remains even though he's from a hated wife. What do we see from this? A B'choira remains a B'choira. So based on that, Yitzchak had the same thing. He was well aware that Esav was the B'choira, and Esav was the B'choira. He wanted to give him a bracha, which is worthy to the B'choira. We find later Vayechad Yitzchak Charoda Gedola, that when Yitzchak realized what happened, he gave a very big shiver, trembled very strongly. And the Rebbe is learning the Vayechad Yitzchak Charoda Gedola. We could learn that was for various reasons. Could be that he got scared, maybe he's no longer being watched. Could be for that. And could be that he got scared for other reasons as well. Memela, we see that the entire life of Yitzchak was just like a person who has an oila tmima. A person who's going ahead to be makriv, a kolm oila, and it's going to be a whole and complete oila. He definitely seeks after it and watches after it and makes sure that it is complete and nothing wrong happens to it. The very same was the attitude which was given to Yitzchak. This is, however, all pertaining Yitzchak. Pertaining Rivka, he was afraid that she was an akara, and that is why he was mispalel for a Rivka, that the Rebbe should help her, and that together they should have a child. Once Rivka got pregnant, and she became the problem. Vayisroitzetzu habanim bikirba. If so, if that's the case, why did she have such a desire to pregnancy when she realized what type of problems it leads her into? So the pasuk goes ahead. So she went to inquire by the Rebishter what's going on. What does Rashi tell us? Where did she go to? She went to the Beis HaMedrash of shame, to the house of shame, to the Beis HaMedrash of shame. So the question arises: why didn't she turn to her husband? She had a husband, Yitzchak. She had a father-in-law, Avraham. Why didn't she turn to them? Furthermore, we know that there is shame and aver. Later we will have how Yaakov learned in the yeshiva of the Beis HaMedrash of shame and aver. She went specifically to shame. She didn't go to aver. Why not to aver? The Rebbe explained, I recall at the moment how, that aver was closer than shame. So she could have went to Ava and not to Shem.
Closer in distance?
Distance-wise. And nonetheless we see that Rashi stresses, where did she go? Vatelech lidresh es Hashem. She went to whom? To Shem. So Rebbe is learning, being that we find in Chumash, regarding shame we find, V'hu choyein lekei. What is the definition of shame? That shame was a kohen lekei to the Rebishter. What was shame? His inyan was he was a servant of the Rebishter. If Rivka was searching for lidresh es Hashem, there was no one more suitable for her to go to than to Shem, because this is what Shem's title was. Shem was kohen lekei. Why didn't she go discuss it with her husband? Why didn't she discuss it with her father-in-law? Rather than going a long trip, lidresh es Hashem. So the Rebbe is learning very simple. This Rebbe is explaining mitzat pshat. They were waiting for a child for many years. And Yitzchak prayed and was mispalled to the Rebishter that, as we just discussed, he put the blame on Rivka, that Rivka was an akora. And then the Rebishter helped that Vatah Rivka ishte, that she did become pregnant. Now what's happening? The children within her are pushing around one another, struggling inside, and she's getting disappointed. She's saying, Im Kain, if that's the case, why did I get into all this? As Rashi tells us, and why am I begging to have a child at the time it's involved with so much hardships? It would have been the most not proper thing for her to go ahead and discuss this with Yitzchak. She would have broken Yitzchak. She knew how Yitzchak was eager to have a child together with her. Now that she's pregnant and she's at a moment of disappointment, and she's coming out with a feeling of Lamazel Noichi, why am I... What does he mean, Lamazel Noichi? Why did I go for all this? In other words, she's kind of regretting for getting involved into this. She's regretting the fact that she is pregnant now, and she's complaining about that. She Taka didn't know the answer, what the answer was. And at that time she was very disappointed, to the extent that she is expressing herself, she should go to Yitzchak or even to Avram and relate such feelings. She understood very well that Yitzchak and Avram also would have a tremendous amount of egmas nefesh, would feel very bad to hear that Rivka is so disappointed. So that's why she stood away from discussing this with her husband. She stood away from discussing this as well with her shver. And whom did she go to? She went to Shem, who was a koyen lekei elyon, and this is in the true sense. She went lidrosh es Hashem. She went to inquire by the Rebishter to give her an interpretation of what's going on. Weiter we find in the brachas which the Rebishter gave Yitzchak. So what did the Rebishter tell Yitzchak? The Rebishter should give you from the dew of the heaven, so Rashi does not explain here what is the meaning of Mishmanei Haaretz. Truth is, the Rebbe says, there's a Chazal, the Gemara says that this applies to Torah. All various levels of Torah are included in this bracha. But the Rebbe concluded The Rebbe should give us the bracha, not only the way it stands spiritually in Torah, but the Rebbe should give us the Gashmius the bracha. It should be v'yitn l'chol lekim mital hashamayim u'mishmanei haaretz v'roiv dogam v'sirish. Yidden should have a tremendous abundance of brachas in Gashmius. A similar pasuk we find, however, when Esav came to his father. What did Yitzchak tell Esav? Mishmanei haaretz yeh meishavecha. He's using the same expression, Mishmanei haaretz, from the fat of the earth, should be your place of residence. What does Rashi explain on Mishmanei haaretz yeh meishavecha? That is in Pasuk Lamed Tes. Mishmanei haaretz, so Rashi tells us, Zui Talya Shel Yavam. What was given to Esav? Italy, Italia Shel Yavam. The Rebbe raises the question, the word Mishmanei haaretz was used by Yankov as well. There Rashi doesn't say anything. Only when Mishmanei haaretz is repeated, and it is used again by Esav. Here Rashi interprets, Vos meint Mishmanei haaretz, you should know it means Italia Shel Yavam. If Mishmanei haaretz requires an interpretation, then Rashi should have said it the first time, when it's said to Yaakov. Rebbe says, this was once discussed years ago in a previous Farbrengen, and at that time he explained it, that there's a Gemara. There's an interesting Gemara, what led to the being of Italy, of Italia. Italia Shel Yavam. Obviously it's the same Italy. So there's a whole Gemara where the Gemara tells us at length that it happened in the days of Shloima. A ship traveled, and Noah's Kona Bayam stuck a stick into the water, and that is where they settled as Italy. And that is when the entire country of Italia began. It's explained in Gemara at length. So therefore, plus Esav at that time, when he got the bracha, did not live yet in Italia. Then he lived still in a house, Mount Seir. Now, the Rebbe Yitzchak is giving brachas to Yaakov. What is he telling Yaakov? V'yitn l'chol lekim mital hashamayim u'mishmanei haaretz. So he already gave everything to whom? He gave everything to Yaakov. Now that he has to give a bracha to Yitzchak, now that he has to give a bracha to Esav, what kind of bracha is left to give him? So he could only give him something which was not around at that time. Therefore it wasn't given to Yaakov yet. Something which will come about into being generations later. And this is Italia, and that is why Rashi is telling us Pshat, Avos meint me Mishmanei haaretz. Mishmanei haaretz meint us Italia. The Rebbe says this was discussed years ago and previously in a Farbrengen such a Perush. However, the Rebbe says we still have to find reason why the same Mishmanei haaretz actually is mentioned by Yaakov as well, and still by Mishmanei haaretz of Yaakov, Rashi does not comment anything. So here the Rebbe is learning. We have to look into the pasuk. Listen carefully. By Yaakov, what did he say? V'yitan l'chol lekim mital hashamayim mishmanei haaretz. The Rebbe should give you from the dew of the heaven, u'mishmanei haaretz, from the fat of the earth. In other words, any fat place in the earth should be yours. What is he saying by Esav? By Esav, the expression is different. Mishmanei haaretz yeh meishavecha. Where are you going to be settled? Where are you going to be living? And the place which is going to be can be defined as Mishmanei haaretz, a fat piece of land. So in other words, while Yaakov is getting Mishmanei haaretz in a general and a broad way, that all over where he will be, Zol Zayin Mishmanei haaretz, Esav's bracha is a different one. What is the bracha to Esav? Esav is telling, Mishmanei haaretz yeh meishavecha. Where will you be settled? Now at that time when he gave him the bracha, Esav was living in Har Seir. But years later, where is it going to be fulfilled, the bracha of Mishmanei haaretz yeh meishavecha, that your settlement your place of Moshav, your place of residence, can be defined Mishmanei Haaretz. To Yaakov he didn't say that. Yaakov, he gave the whole world, he gave him everything. He gave him Tal HaShamayim, he gave him Mishmanei Haaretz. The bracha to Esav is a limited bracha. What is he telling Esav? Only Mishmanei Haaretz yeh Moshavecha. That is why Rashi is compelled to find what is the Moshav of Mishmanei Haaretz. Where is an area where Esav settled that it is considered Mishmanei Haaretz, a fat piece of land? So Rashi is learning Zui Tagi Shel Yavon. So we see how every word in Rashi is extremely accurate, and every word in the pasuk is accurate, and there is reason. Though Mishmanei Haaretz is used by Yaakov and it's used by Esav, and by Yaakov it's used the first time, still there Rashi doesn't have to say anything. But when it's used the second time, by the Lashon of to Esav, Mishmanei Haaretz yeh Moshavecha, that is where Rashi stresses what is the meaning of Mishmanei Haaretz, Zui Tagi Shel Yavon. The Farbrengen later, the Rebbe also referred to L'Kutei Levi Yitzchak, commentary of his father on the Zohar, referred to it very briefly. His father discusses an inyan of the Shnei HaSeirim, of the two goats which were brought in the Beis HaMikdash, on Yom Kippur. These two goats, and there was a lot, there was a goyrel made with these two goats. That's what you read in Chumash in the Avodah of Yom Kippur. Talking about a goyrel, Rebbe mentioned that it's brought in Sfarim, that anything which happens with a goyrel, anything that happens with a lot, a goyrel, has the same effectiveness as if it would have been said in Aseres HaDibros. That's what's brought in Sfarim. In other words, when something, an action which transpires based on a goyrel, has the same effect, the same strength as an inyan which is mentioned specifically in Aseres HaDibros. Why? Because the pasuk uses the expression goyrel al pi Hashem, and therefore it's brought in Sfarim that anything that happens on a goyrel is considered like al pi Hashem, like out of the mouth of the Eibishter, just like the Aseres HaDibros. The Rebbe, however, came to the L'Kutei Levi Yitzchak, it's already at the very end of the Farbrengen, just brought out that we find another inyan in goyrel. What's the pshat of goyrel? In a goyrel, everything is equal. Lottery. Everything is equal. In other words, we don't see how one should supersede another. The same, Rabbi says, this reminds us on the inyan of Hakel. Inyan this year, Shnas Hakel, which the Rebbe keeps on reminding in every Farbrengen. What's the inyan of Hakel? Hakel also shows us how everyone is standing united, how everyone is equally united, all of Klal Yisrael. So it's again an opportune time to remind everyone that this is the special year, the year of Hakel. How the Rebbe wants that we should all be involved in doing acts of Hakel in any way possible, individually, with smaller groups or with bigger groups. The main thing that we should be involved in Inyanim of Hakel and utilize this year, which is a special year, a year of Hakel. A good Tavach and a good Yontif.